The wedding dress hung in Jessica's closet like a beautiful ghost, ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves that she'd chosen 18 months ago when walking down an aisle seemed as natural as breathing. Now at 27, Jessica Martinez stared at the dress from her wheelchair and wondered how she'd ever imagined herself gliding across a dance floor in David's arms for their first dance as husband and wife. The car accident had happened on a rainy Thursday evening in November, exactly 13 months before her planned wedding date. Jessica had been driving home from her job at the marketing firm where she worked as a creative director, looking forward to a quiet evening with David planning seating charts and finalizing catering details. The drunk driver, who ran the red light and slammed into the passenger side of her Honda Civic, had stolen many things that night. Her ability to walk, her sense of physical security, and her confidence that the future she'd planned would unfold as expected. The diagnosis was complete. Deep spinal cord injury, resulting in paraplegia, no sensation or movement below her waist. The doctors had been direct, but gentle. Jessica would never walk again. She would need to use a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Everything about her daily existence would need to be reimagined and adapted. The first weeks in the hospital had been the darkest of Jessica's life. Physical therapy focused on building upper body strength and learning to transfer from bed to wheelchair. Occupational therapy taught her how to navigate daily tasks from a seated position, but it was the emotional therapy that proved most challenging. Learning to envision a future that looked completely different from everything she'd planned and dreamed. David Walsh had been her constant companion through every stage of recovery. They'd been together for 4 years and engaged for 6 months when the accident happened. During those initial conversations about Jessica's prognosis, when doctors explained the permanent nature of her injury and the extensive adaptations their lives would require, David's response had been immediate and unwavering. "I didn't fall in love with your legs," he'd told her during one of her darkest moments. "I fell in love with your laugh, your intelligence, your kindness, your spirit. None of those things changed in that car. You're still the woman I want to marry." But Jessica's relationship with her own identity had become much more complicated. The confident, active woman who had jogged every morning, danced salsa on weekends, and moved through the world with unconscious physical ease, felt like a stranger. Learning to navigate life from a wheelchair required not just physical adaptation, but a complete reconstruction of how she saw herself. The wedding planning had been put on indefinite hold during Jessica's initial recovery. Well-meaning friends and family members had suggested they might want to consider a small ceremony, maybe something simple at home, perhaps postponing the celebration until Jessica felt more ready. But as Jessica grew stronger and more confident in her new reality, she and David had made a decision that surprised everyone. They wanted to proceed with their original wedding plans. "I'm not going to let this accident shrink our joy," Jessica had declared during a family dinner 6 months after the injury. "I'm still getting married to the love of my life. I'm still going to wear a beautiful dress, have all our friends and family there, and celebrate the beginning of our life together. I'll just be doing it sitting down." The wedding industry, Jessica discovered, wasn't particularly well equipped for brides in wheelchairs. Finding a dress that would look beautiful while seated required multiple consultations with seamstresses who had never addressed that particular challenge. The venue had to be checked for accessibility, ramps, bathroom accommodations, space for a wheelchair to navigate comfortably. Even the traditional first dance needed to be completely reconceptualized. "I used to imagine us swaying together to At Last by Etta James," Jessica had told their wedding planner. "Now I'm trying to figure out what our first dance even looks like. Do I stay in my chair? Does David sit? Do we skip it entirely?" The solution they'd eventually developed was both practical and beautiful. David would dance while Jessica remained in her wheelchair, with their choreographer, creating movements that incorporated both their different physical realities. It wouldn't look like the traditional bride and groom first dance, but it would be uniquely theirs. The Family Feud opportunity had come through Jessica's physical therapy clinic, which had nominated her for the show's special episode featuring people who had redefined strength and resilience after life-changing events. The nomination letter had focused not just on Jessica's recovery from her accident, but on her determination to celebrate her wedding exactly as she'd originally envisioned it. When Jessica first received the call from the show's producers, her initial reaction was anxiety about the logistics and the potential for her story to be sensationalized. But when she mentioned the opportunity to David, his enthusiasm was immediate. "Jess, this could help other people understand that disability doesn't mean your dreams have to change," he'd said. "Maybe someone watching will realize that they can still have the wedding they want, or the life they want, even if they have to adapt how they get there." The producers had been incredibly accommodating, ensuring the studio was fully accessible and offering to arrange for Jessica to visit the set beforehand to familiarize herself with the layout. They'd also been sensitive to the fact that Jessica was getting married in 2 days and had scheduled the taping to avoid any conflict with final wedding preparations. The Martinez-Walsh family team consisted of Jessica, David, Jessica's parents, Maria and Carlos, and David's sister Sarah, who was serving as maid of honor. They'd all been part of Jessica's recovery journey and were excited to support her in this moment of public celebration. Steve Harvey noticed Jessica immediately during the pre-show warm-up. There was something about her presence, the way she navigated her wheelchair with confidence and grace, the obvious love and support between her and David, and the joy that seemed to radiate from her despite everything she'd been through. But what struck Steve most was Jessica's smile, genuine, radiant, and completely without self-pity. "Jessica," Steve said during introductions, approaching her wheelchair with the respectful energy he reserved for contestants whose stories he sensed were particularly meaningful. "Tell me about yourself and what you're celebrating." Jessica straightened in her wheelchair, her voice clear and strong. "I'm Jessica Martinez from San Diego, California, and I'm getting married in 2 days to the love of my life, David Walsh." David stepped forward and placed his hand on Jessica's shoulder in a gesture that was both protective and proud. "And I'm the luckiest man in the world," he added. Steve's expression showed genuine happiness for their upcoming wedding, but he could sense there was more to their story. 2 days away. That's exciting. Tell me about your wedding plans," Steve said. Jessica's face lit up with the excitement of any bride discussing her upcoming wedding. "We're having a garden ceremony with about 150 guests, followed by a reception with dinner and dancing. I've been planning this wedding for almost 2 years, and I can't wait to finally celebrate." "What's been the most important part of planning your wedding?" Steve asked. Jessica paused, considering the question carefully. She could talk about the flowers, the menu, the music selection, but the truth was more complex and more meaningful. "Making sure that our wedding reflects who we really are as a couple," Jessica said. "Not who people think we should be, or what people think we can or can't do, but who we actually are. 2 people who love each other completely and want to celebrate that love with everyone we care about." Steve nodded, sensing there was a deeper story that Jessica wasn't quite ready to share yet. The game began against the Rodriguez family from Texas, and both teams proved competitive. Jessica was sharp with her answers, demonstrating quick thinking and a sense of humor that made her immediately likable to the studio audience. When questions required physical demonstrations or gestures, David would naturally assist without making Jessica seem dependent, and Jessica would redirect attention to her mental agility rather than her physical limitations. During commercial breaks, Steve found himself drawn to Jessica and David's relationship. There was something about their dynamic, the way they communicated without words, the way David seemed to anticipate Jessica's needs without being overprotective, and the way Jessica maintained her independence while accepting support, that spoke of a partnership that had been tested and had emerged stronger. It was during the 4th round that the question came that would allow Jessica to share the deepest truth about love and commitment. "We surveyed 100 people," Steve announced. "Name the most important part of a wedding." Jessica was at the podium. The question felt like an invitation to share everything she'd learned about love, commitment, and what really mattered when 2 people decided to build a life together. She thought about all the wedding planning details that had seemed so important before her accident, and all the adaptations they'd had to make since. "The moment you choose each other despite everything," Jessica said clearly. The words carried such weight, such hard-won wisdom, that the studio fell completely silent. Steve set down his cards immediately and approached Jessica. "The moment you choose each other, despite everything," Steve repeated softly. Jessica, That's beautiful. Tell me what you mean by that. Jessica took a deep breath, realizing she was about to share the most vulnerable part of her story on national television. 13 months ago, I was in a car accident that left me paralyzed from the waist down, Jessica said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. Suddenly, everything about our future looked different. I couldn't walk down the aisle the way I'd imagined. I couldn't dance at our reception the way we'd planned. I couldn't be the wife I thought David was expecting to marry. The audience was completely quiet, drawn into Jessica's honest vulnerability. But David never wavered, Jessica continued, looking at her fiancé with obvious love. He didn't see my accident as something that changed who I was, or what our marriage could be. He saw it as something we would navigate together. The most important part of our wedding isn't any of the details we planned. It's the moment when we promise to choose each other every day, no matter what challenges come our way. David couldn't stay in the family section any longer. He approached Jessica's wheelchair and knelt down beside her. "Mr. Harvey," David said, his voice thick with emotion, "Jessica thinks her accident changed everything about who she is, but she's wrong. She's still the strongest, most beautiful, most incredible woman I've ever met. She's still the person I want to wake up next to every morning for the rest of my life." The accident didn't change my feelings about marrying her. It just made me more grateful that she said yes. Steve was visibly moved by David's declaration and the obvious depth of love between them. "Jessica," Steve said, his voice gentle but serious, "how did you get from that hospital room to planning the wedding you always wanted?" Jessica smiled, the kind of smile that comes from complete acceptance of life's unexpected turns. "I had to learn that being in a wheelchair doesn't make me less of a bride," Jessica said. "It just makes me a different kind of bride. I'm still going to wear a beautiful dress. We just had to modify it to look perfect while I'm seated. I'm still going to have a first dance with my husband. We just had to choreograph it differently. I'm still going to celebrate the happiest day of my life. I'll just be doing it from a wheelchair." "And how does that feel?" Steve asked. "It feels like freedom," Jessica replied without hesitation. "Freedom from trying to be something I'm not. Freedom from hiding who I've become. Freedom to celebrate love exactly as it is, imperfect, adapted, but completely real." Steve walked closer to Jessica's wheelchair, his expression intense with respect and admiration. "Jessica, I need you to understand something. What you just described isn't just wedding planning, it's wisdom. You're teaching everyone in this studio, everyone watching at home, that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing to love someone completely, exactly as they are." Jessica's composure began to falter as the emotion of the moment reached her. "I spent months thinking that David was settling for less," she admitted quietly, "that he was staying with me out of obligation or pity. But I finally understood that he wasn't settling for less. He was choosing more complexity, more challenge, more opportunity to prove that love is stronger than circumstances." Steve turned to address the studio audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, Jessica and David are showing us something that every couple needs to understand. They're showing us that real love doesn't depend on perfect circumstances. It depends on the decision to love someone through whatever circumstances arise." The audience began to applaud, but Steve continued. "Jessica, you're not just getting married in a wheelchair. You're getting married as a woman who understands that love transcends physical ability, that beauty comes in many forms, and that the strongest couples are forged in the fires of adversity." Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card. "I want you to have this," Steve said, "because I want you to call me after your wedding and tell me how perfect it was. Because I know it's going to be perfect. Not because everything will go according to plan, but because it will be a celebration of real, tested, unshakable love." Then, Steve did something unprecedented. He removed his suit jacket and gently placed it across Jessica's lap. "This jacket has been with me through thousands of shows," Steve said. "But today, it belongs to someone who's taught me what real strength looks like. You wear this and remember that you're not just a bride in a wheelchair. You're a bride who chose love over fear, celebration over sorrow, and joy over circumstances." David stood and placed his hand on Steve's shoulder. "Mr. Harvey, thank you for seeing Jessica the way I see her. not as someone who's overcome disability, but as someone who's shown that love doesn't require walking to dance. The standing ovation that followed was unlike anything the Family Feud studio had ever heard. The audience was on their feet, many crying openly, witnessing something that transcended entertainment and entered the realm of pure inspiration. But the moment that would become legendary happened when Jessica looked directly into the camera and said, "To anyone watching who thinks their circumstances have changed what's possible for them, they haven't. They've just changed how you get there, and sometimes the detour is more beautiful than the original path ever could have been." The episode aired 6 weeks after Jessica and David's wedding, and by then, their wedding photos and video had already begun circulating on social media, showing a radiant bride in a custom-designed dress that looked stunning from her wheelchair and a first dance that redefined what wedding choreography could look like. The Family Feud episode immediately went viral, with Jessica's message about choosing love despite everything being shared millions of times. But more importantly, it sparked conversations about accessibility, about redefining beauty standards, and about the ways that love can transcend any physical limitation. Jessica received thousands of messages from other people with disabilities, from couples facing their own challenges, and from viewers who had been inspired by her perspective on love and adaptation. But the messages that meant the most came from other brides planning weddings while navigating disabilities, who thanked her for showing them that their dream weddings were still possible. The wedding itself had been everything Jessica and David had envisioned, and more. The modified dress had been stunning. The ceremony had been flawless, and their first dance, with David moving around Jessica's wheelchair in a choreographed routine that incorporated both their realities, had been more beautiful than any traditional dance could have been. "Our first dance wasn't about me compensating for being in a wheelchair," Jessica reflected in an interview months later. "It was about us creating something new together, something that was uniquely ours. That's what marriage is. Creating something new together that honors both people exactly as they are." Today, Jessica and David Walsh live in a fully accessible home in San Diego, where Jessica continues her work as a creative director and David works as a software engineer. They're active in the disability rights community and frequently speak at events about accessibility, adaptive wedding planning, and the ways that couples can navigate unexpected challenges together. Jessica still wears Steve's jacket to speaking engagements, and it has become a symbol of her message that circumstances don't define possibilities. They just redefine approaches. Their wedding album, featuring Jessica in her custom dress and their unique first dance, has been featured in several bridal magazines as an example of how weddings can be adapted without sacrificing beauty or meaning. But perhaps the most meaningful change has been in Jessica's relationship with her own identity. She no longer sees herself as a woman who happens to be in a wheelchair, or as someone whose accident changed who she is. She sees herself as a woman who learned that strength isn't about what you can do with your body, it's about what you choose to do with your spirit. In their home office, next to photos from their wedding and Steve Harvey's business card, hangs a framed copy of their wedding vows. Jessica's vow, which she wrote after the accident, reads, "I promise to choose you every day, not despite our challenges, but because of the way we face them together. I promise to dance with you in whatever way we can, to build dreams that fit our reality, and to prove that love doesn't require perfect circumstances. It creates them." Because Jessica had learned that the most profound truth about love isn't that it conquers all obstacles. It's that real love doesn't see obstacles as reasons to quit. It sees them as opportunities to prove that some bonds are stronger than any circumstance life can present. And in San Diego, California, in a house designed for wheelchairs and filled with laughter, a woman, who once thought her accident had ruined her fairy tale, discovered that sometimes life writes better endings than the ones we originally planned. Sometimes the most beautiful dances are the ones that redefine what dancing means. And sometimes the strongest marriages are built by people who learned that love isn't about what you can do together. It's about who you choose to become together, regardless of what life asks you to overcome.